There's a choice here. Trying to decide whether or not to probe Salyu's memories. If I'm... Natsuhiko's thought was that they should just do it to make sure nothing was wrong, considering everything that could go wrong. We just left things as is here, and I'm pretty sure we just did that. I trust Yuri's judgment, so I'm going to just go along with her, but what if I back this off? That was Natsuhiko's intention all along. Oop, I didn't back it off far enough, I guess. Oops. Didn't go back far enough. There we go. Doubt. For some reason, Yuuri was being almost uncharacteristically obstinate. What? Why is Yuuri so against the idea of diving through Salyu's memories? Is there some sort of connection between Salyu and Yuuri? Once he pondered that question, suddenly, a vision of what he saw from within Enna's memory flashed before his eyes. As well as a vision of the day Salyu transferred in. Oh shit. Communicator A and Salyu are both from Andresi? When he looked at Salyu's face, he felt she somewhat resembled Communicator A. I was saying that! Huh? What? What's the meaning of this? He didn't understand the reason why, but he had a feeling it had something to do with Yuri's odd behavior. Since Communicator A spent the last year of her life inside Labo. You're wrong. Yuuri fell silent. Salyu then interrupted. Just having a mental debate here, Salyu, don't mind me. It was too hard to explain, so Natsuhiko just gave a non-committal answer. Yuuri? Right after she said that, Salyu took a deep breath. Eh? Huh? What? True, Natsuhiko did find it somewhat bizarre that her parents wouldn't let their daughter out of the house at all, but... What? Salyu gazed at Yuuri and spoke. Natsuhiko doubted his ears. What? Thoroughly confused, Natsuhiko looked at Yuuri, but she did not look particularly surprised.
9月9日の記憶。
What?
記憶操作という単語。ゼロエリア。あなたの部屋。詳しいことは思い出せないけど、私はあなたに返しきれない恩がある気がする。
Salyu's words confused Natsuhiko even further.
ユーリ、本当なのか？サリュの言っていること。
That explains what she was afraid of us discovering. Upon hearing that question, Yuuri nodded in resignation.
実はシャルちゃんの記憶は私が一度改ざんしているの。
どうして？
仕方なかったの。覚えていちゃいけないことがあったから。ユーリ、その記憶は元に戻すことはできるの？できるけど、知らない方がいいかもしれないよ。その方がサルちゃんのためになると思って私は記憶を操作したの。真実を知っても悲しくなるだけかもしれない。それでもいいの？
I can't believe I didn't pick up on what Yuuri was doing earlier, trying to cover up. Can't believe I missed this the first time. Salyu answered Yuri's question on the spot.
構わない。記憶を戻して。私は真実を知りたい。嘘の中で生きていくよりいい。
Natsuhiko pondered as he heard that statement. She was exactly right. Averting your eyes from the truth meant that you could not move forward. Salyu needed to know the truth the same way he did.
じゃあ今回はユーリだけがサリュの記憶に潜るのか？
いや、夏彦にも見てほしい。
Oh.
内容はおぼろげに予想はついている。だから夏彦にも見てもらいたい。
Oh.
そして叶うならば
Salyu's honest words pierced Natsuhiko in the heart.
ヒコリ、私からもお願い。一緒に私のやったことを見て、私たちの過去を。
ああ。
Natsuhiko nodded at those words, and thus, hand in hand with Yuuri, he tried using Senses Sympathy. It was a memory of when Salyu was still in France. The sights she saw spread before Natsuhiko's field of view. Salyu sat in front of a piano, thinking to herself, "My entire world lies within this estate." Eventually, Salyu's tutor entered her room.
ルイーズ、練習の時間です。
今日は何を弾くの？
The tutor answered by giving Salyu her lesson plan for the day.
今日から新しい曲を。ラベルの夜のガスパール。
Gaspard de la Nuit.
情緒を込めて悲壮感たっぷりに。
Salyu nodded and began to play the song. Pale fingers wove smoothly over the ivory keyboard. Though her hands reproduced the beauty of the emotional melodies, her heart felt nothing. Salyu was born and raised inside this estate. For some reason, her parents would not let her leave the grounds. Naturally, that meant she did not go to school. Instead, she was surrounded by the company of tutors of all sorts and received training in just about every field imaginable. And perhaps the result of the tutor's excellence, or perhaps the brilliance of Salyu's all-encompassing talent. Salyu had barely reached the age of 10 when she had gained a pool of knowledge both deep and wide. It's just as Salyu told us. Natsuhiko thought to himself as he watched that memory. The sight before him agreed with what Salyu had told him of her past a few days ago. That moment, Yuri's voice echoed in his head.
違うの、ヒコリ。この記憶は偽物なの。私が作った嘘の記憶なんだよ。
Oh wow. I knew it. Yuri had already told him that she had falsified Salyu's memory. Why would you do this?
そうすることでしか彼女を救えなかったから。
What's that supposed to mean?
今解散前の記憶に戻すね。
I'm nervous.
サルちゃんの本当の記憶は。
What am I gonna see here? Oh, I don't like this. At the moment Yuuri muttered that, the sight before them faded like mist. Beyond the veil of mist lied another, different sight. What is this? Yuuri continued as Natsuhiko recoiled in bewilderment.
この子は私よりもずっと過酷な運命を背負っていたの。
What is this? It was a cold, gloomy room, almost like a prison. Salyu stood still in that room, thinking to herself. My entire world lies within this facility. Facility? That word triggered red flags in Natsuhiko's mind. The door opened. It was not a tutor that entered the room.
ユイ、
What?
出なさい。
Yoko! But a woman Natsuhiko knew well.
実験の時間よ。
What is this? As Dr. Tenkawa entered the room, Salyu asked her a question.
今日は誰の記憶を移すの？
What?
流体物理学の権威、加賀の名誉教授の記憶よ。
What is going on
流
here?
体物理学興味ない。
理解してしまえば案外面白いかもしれないじゃない。どうせ一瞬の出来事でしょ。
What? Dr. Tenkawa was indeed right. Salyu nodded and followed her outside the room. What? Other researchers were waiting outside. She lived here? They brought Salyu through the underground garden and stopped in front of Subject N's room. There they blindfolded Salyu and bound her feet and hands. What? Beyond that door was Subject N. What is happening? Anyone who wanted to meet her had to be either completely bound or injected with AD. Dr. Tenkawa and the other researchers opened the door and brought Salyu into Subject N's room. What the fuck is
お
that?
疲れ様です。
What? They heard Subject N's voice. The researchers soon responded.
始めるぞ、被験体 N。記憶伝達実験フェーズ2第316号開始します。3号被験体 N から2号被験体 Y へセンシズシンパシー開始。
はい。
With that signal, a flood of information flowed into Salyu's head. It was the memory of the Fluid Mechanics Authority, or whomever it was that Dr. Tenkawa spoke about earlier. Salyu groaned. It only took a moment each time, Salyu could never get used to that feeling. Even though it was only memories that were being written onto her brain, it felt like even her own mind was being rewritten. Holy shit.
終わりました。
But as soon as Subject N gave the word, the bizarre sensation faded.
了解。それでは被験体 Y 退去。
Holy shit. Salyu was then taken out of the room again. Once they were in the underground garden, Dr. Tenkawa took out her PDA and handed it over to Salyu.
ユイ、この問題を解いてみて。
On her PDA screen was a problem relating to fluid mechanics. August 2015, a solid body flow pattern was confirmed near Jupiter's south pole. The following data table represents a two-dimensional model of that flow pattern. Based on the data, explain the mechanism behind the formation of the flow pattern.
了解。
Salyu took the PDA and smoothly solved the problem. Dr. Tenkawa looked at Salyu's solution and then spoke.
正解よ。
当然。
It was no surprise. That problem itself was made by the very same fluid mechanics authority whose memories Salyu now had. Thus, there was no conceivable way Salyu would be unable to solve it.
記憶伝達の成功を確認。記憶伝達実験フェーズ2第316号終了します。
Trial 316. Austin 316 says I just whipped your ass, gives Miyoko a stone cold stunner. Glass shatters. Yui power walks out of the building aggressively. Dr. Tenkawa spoke those words into a voice recorder and then addressed Salyu.
それでは今日のお勤めは終わりよ。部屋に帰りましょう。
わかった。
Are we seriously? This does explain child genius, Salyu. I can't believe that we're explaining this. This really does explain Child Genius Salyu, holy shit. So, Are we really doubling down on our ethical fuck-up in breaking Nagisa? By getting more kids involved? Oops, we overloaded Nagisa with too many minds, so let's get her to offload some of them to some other innocent child. Jesus Christ, Lebo. That answer, Dr. Tenkawa brought Salyu back to the room she started out in. This was Salyu's one and only unconditional role. To be a part of Lebo's 4 years and going memory transfer experiment. The subject matter of the experiment was simple. First, Lebo would invite guests with technical expertise to come to the facility. After putting a guest to sleep with drugs, they would quickly bring them to Subject N's room. There, Subject N would apply Senses Sympathy to steal all the guests' knowledge. Skilled level 6 communicators able to handle memories inside the human mind, almost as if they were digital data. The communicator could copy and paste the memories into their own mind, as well as bestow their own memories to a third party. Such tasks were easy, assuming one could manipulate intracerebral BC particles at will. Furthermore, the entire process took only a negligible amount of time. The guest would be left with a memory gap, but all Subject N had to do was fill it in with a fabricated memory. Once the drugs wore off and a guest woke up, they would not remember a thing. They would not even be aware that anything had happened to them. Wow, we're tripling down on the unethical experiments. It was an extremely efficient, perfectly imperceptible theft of trade secrets. Wow. The backbone of an industrial espionage effort created by Lebo, Rokame City, and a certain corporation. Well, it's a well-planned system. That was what Salyu thought. There were several ways of inviting the guests as well. Sometimes they'd be invited directly with made-up business. Sometimes they'd visit Lebo of their own accord. Rokame City Hospital was yet another entity in on the deal, and thus there were the cases where they had drugged patients who had useful knowledge and transported them to Lebo. Wow, that's shady as fuck! Thus Lebo obtained knowledge from visiting guests and applied that knowledge for use at its own facility. In its greed, Lebo also stole trade secrets that had no direct relation to BC in order to sell them off to other research facilities they had connections with. They broke Nagisa over greed. Fuck, dude. Salyu's role was to be one of the final cogs in the process. All the memories and knowledge Subject N stole from the guests were transcribed onto Salyu's brain. As a backup, so to speak. Salyu was thus a spare brain for Subject N. What? That said, Salyu didn't think much about it. She had already been burdened with that role for as long as she could remember. Just once or twice a week, the professor would come bring her to Subject N's room and back, just like today. As long as she did that, she received all of her living necessities. She gets fucking bare bones room, and the level 6 communicators get full, beautiful room. She gets bare bones shit. Fuck, what are we doing here? This sucks. All necessities except for freedom, that is. Is it just that she doesn't want to ask for anything? Or are they not giving her anything? Dr. Tenkawa thanked her as always. Salyu noticed her voice was just a little bit quieter than usual.
博士、元気ない。
大丈夫。少し疲れているだけよ。ここのところ忙しくてね。
Salyu was relieved. As long as the professor said so, it was probably just that.
申し訳ないけど、予定があるのでもう行くわ。後でまた顔を出すから。
次の予定は？
うん。しばらくはないかもしれないわ。被験体 N の体調が近頃優れないの。
そう。
Salyu felt glad that she wouldn't have to deal with that troublesome sensation. At the same time, she felt a little lonely that the appointments were diminishing.
予定が決まったら教えるわね。それじゃあまた。
With that, the professor left the room. Salyu gazed at the shut door. As long as nobody opened that door from the outside, it would never open. Salyu thought she would have a bit of free time until the next time the professor came. Salyu herself wasn't quite sure of how long this had continued. The trifling past had sunk to the bottom of her vast, oft rewritten pool of knowledge. What she did remember was that when she was younger, she had a different sort of role. If I'm not mistaken, that was the experiment to inundate the party with WX particles. Those experiments, Salyu was exposed to a WX particle-filled environment created in Area N for extended periods of time. Fuck! Exposure to such an environment could artificially raise BC aptitude, or at least that was the goal of the experiment. But Salyu showed no results. The experiments failed, leaving her with the rank F aptitude she was born with. Compared to back then, any experiment would be better. Salyu was thankful that those experiments had ended 5 years ago. The current memory transfer experiment hadn't had a single failure. Unlike the experiments in the past, these ones have a definite purpose. Although she was a backup, Salyu wasn't able to leave and had gained all sorts of knowledge. Proved that even knowledge of how to perform physical techniques could be inherited. At the age of 6, she had a complete understanding of Kant's critique of pure reason. Was able to identify its points of issue from an existentialist perspective. At the age of 7, she solved the mystery of the zeta function that had been plaguing mathematicians around the globe. She also proved the Riemann hypothesis. At the age of 8, she inherited the knowledge of an elderly pianist and successfully played the extremely different piano piece Gaspard de la Nuit. At the age of 9, she had learned all sorts of athletic techniques ranging from artistic gymnastics to ball games and martial arts. By today, at the age of 10, Salyu had the knowledge of 316 specialists of all sorts of fields, packed within her brain. Jesus! And thus, I became a monster. The amount of knowledge in Salyu's brain had undeniably exceeded the apparent limit for human beings. Her swelling pool of knowledge was her entire life's history. Before she knew it, it was the very proof of their existence. Jesus! 3 weeks later. Just as Dr. Tenkawa had implied, there wasn't a single experiment since that last one. Salyu spent the whole time alone in this room, reading a book. What she read was a sci-fi novel based on the themes of self and memories. The story involved a scientist attempting to create an electronic brain with a sense of self, and in that process was the following excerpt. The self is formed by memories. Humans decide their wills and behaviors based off their own memories of the past. But I still do not quite understand the process behind this formulation of the self. One would gather a sufficient number of memories. Would that necessarily form a self? One would assume that, as more and more memories are accumulated, the self would become more and more defined. Let's take, for example, the process through which an infant first begins to speak. After an infant is born and they hear their parents speak, the infant gradually appears to memorize sounds. At first, the infant does not know how to utilize its memories. One day, as if the puzzle pieces in the infant's brain finally snap into place, their countless disjointed memories become one connected network. I see, so that's it. Stringing these sounds together is a way to convey my will to other people. And thus the infant begins to speak, and its once isolated self connects with the outer world. This is one process of the formation of the self. As the infant connects its accumulated memories, it uses them to further nurture its own self. Does this effect only apply to the brains of living beings? As you and I both know, no matter how much data you store on a high-capacity disk, the disk does not spontaneously form a self. Why is such an ordinary occurrence in nature impossible for human hands to recreate? That novel's content was philosophical, so it was far detached from the type of adventure stories that Salyu liked. She still found some parts thought-provoking. Maybe I'm something like the high-capacity disk this protagonist mentioned. What's particularly similar is how neither of us chooses the knowledge we gain. There was nothing to be gained by just pondering that fact. She perceived herself, others, and everything in the environment around her simply as the way they were. Just as the door finally opened again after weeks of being shut, in walked the professor.
ゆい、出なさい。
実験？
いえ、今日は健康診断よ。第5エリアに行きましょう。
That means Sally would make the rare departure from Area 0. And she was a little fed up with the tedium, Sally happily nodded at the professor's words. Sally walked with the professor down the hallway to the neuroscience laboratory. Along the way, Sally asked the professor a question.
博士、私は孤児だと聞いていたのだけれど。
そうよ。あなたが赤子だった頃にいたフランスの孤児院が潰れてしまい、行くあてのなくなったあなたを私が引き取ったの。
The professor answered without any change in her facial expression. But Sally shook her head.
嘘。
え？
私はラボの中で生まれたはず。かつてラボにいた被験体から生まれた子なのでは？
Oh shit. Those words stopped the professor in her tracks.
誰から聞いたの？
先日記憶を転送された男がそんな知識を持っていた。事実？
Oh shit.
事実よ。
The professor spoke in a shameful voice. Then she continued in a tone of consolation.
ゆい、ショックかもしれないけど。
別に。
All she thought was, oh. Circumstances of her birth were irrelevant to changing anything about her future. But she was still curious about something.
私の父親と母親は誰？
え？
教えたら、このことについてはもう触れないでくれる？
触れない。
With that, Dr. Tenkawa took a deep breath and answered.
あなたの母親はアリス・アン・フラメというフランス人女性。
Okay.
13年前、BC が世界中で確認され始めた時代に発見された世界で最初の適精度 S コミュニケーター。
Shit, I can't believe we finally came around to that. I brought... I knew there was something to her resembling Salyu so much. Shit. God. I knew it. Oh.
コミュニケーター A と呼ばれ、ラボ設立のきっかけとなった人よ。
母は今どこに？
あなたの出産時に三直死で亡くなってしまったわ。
Oh shit.
では父は？
あなたの父親は安住 A 氏というラボの研究員。当時のアリスの担当管理者。
That's the dude who we saw growing feelings for in Anna's father's memory, right? Wait, what? Wait. No, for some reason I'm thinking that Alice got... No, it was Anna's father who got killed in that moment, recovering Alice.
彼は幽閉中のアリスに恋をしてしまった。
恋？
アリスはラボに幽閉された時、すでに心にひどい疾患を抱えていたのよ。だけど時々正気に戻ることがあった。彼女は繰り返し私たちにもう殺してくださいと訴えたわ。私も耐え難かったけど、担当研究員の安住さんはなお辛かったのでしょうね。
Please kill me. No, I love you.
やがて同情と憐憫は彼女への思いに変わった。人目を忍んで二人は個人的に密会した。アリスも断続的な意識の中、彼と心を通わせ、そして
Okay.
あなたが宿ったの。
そう。父はその後は？
あなたの誕生を待たずして実験中に事故死したわ。
Sally consolidated all this information in her head. She quickly concluded that the circumstances behind her birth...
つまりこういうこと？ 研究員が幽閉中の被験体を妊娠させた。ラボは研究員の起こしたその不祥事を隠そうとした。
There's the blunt outcome.
しかしその被験体は優れたコミュニケーターだった。ならば生まれてくる子供もコミュニケーターかもしれない。
There's the no BS truth of
ラ
it.
ボは生まれながらの被験体が欲しくて、堕胎させるより出産させることを選んだ。
Yep, okay, the normal, the prospect of an actual romantic fling between them is icky enough to consider, but there's the blunt outcome. One, that makes more sense. Two, that's fucked up, dude.
それでできたのが私。そういうこと？
Don't bullshit Salyu. She has the minds of a 316.
当時のラボはそこまで倫理が壊れていなかった。
Have they not? Or did you just not realize it at the time?
アリスの妊娠が発覚したのは6ヶ月を過ぎてからだったの。
And then there's the scandal.
そこまでお腹が大きくなってしまっては堕胎は不可能だから。
なるほど、理解した。
安住さんの死からこの施設はおかしくなり始めたのよ。あの人はラボの両親だったから。
だけどその後も私はこうして被験体として幽閉されている。その理由は？
あなたが天涯孤独で外で一人で生きていくのは難しいと思われたから。それと上層部があなたが外で暮らすことを望まなかったから。ごめんなさい。すべて言い訳ね。
Dr. Tenkawa muttered that bitterly. Salyu sighed and asked another question.
私は適性を一切持たなかった。ラボとしては持て余したでしょう。
そうならないようにあなたに役目を与えたの。
Congratulations, Salyu, you're our backup brain hard drive.
例えば WX 粒子照射実験がそう。あれはあなたの体に致命的な悪影響が起きないようエネルギー量を調整して行ってた。建前でもそういう実験をしておけばあなたの存在意義が保てると思ったの。
And the same probably went for the memory transfer experiment. Ever since long ago, Salyu did not think it was a particularly useful experiment. There was no meaning behind turning a test subject into a prodigy if she couldn't leave Labo. Not even Salyu wanted to think about what happened to test subjects whose existences lost meaning. As Salyu's thought process reached a dead end, the professor spoke up.
ねえユイ、これだけは信じて。あなたは望まれない子ではなかった。ご両親が愛し合って生まれた子なの。
それはどちらでもいいけど、両親がいないのなら名前は誰が？私の名前、ユイ。この名前は誰がつけたの？
Salyu's designation was Subject Y. Dr. Tenkawa was the only one to call her Yui, only when the two of them were alone.
私よ。ご両親はあなたに名をつける前に亡くなってしまったから。
由来は？
もし私に娘が生まれたらそんな名前をつけようと思っていたの。優しく包み込むようなそんな女の子に育ってほしいと。嫌だったかしら？
嫌じゃない。ここの居心地も別に悪くない。何より名前をくれた。私はこの名前を気に入っている。
The professor's eyes widened at those words, then hung her head without saying anything. Salyu peeked into the professor's face.
博士、どうして泣くの？
The professor said nothing. Only sound in the quiet hall was the soft pitter-patter of falling teardrops. A few days after the abrupt physical examination, the uneventful days continued a little while longer. Salyu had finished reading all the books the professor brought for her, and so there were no incoming plans for experiments. She started to get anxious. Something happened. Salyu looked towards the door that would not open. She had thought that the days would repeat the same way forever. That the professor would come into the room like usual and take her for another experiment. In case something strange. There was no way for her to find out the cause behind the situation. Why did she ponder what to do? The door opened.
博士
Salyu called out reflexively.
ユイ、
博士今日の実験は
Salyu was happy to see the professor, thinking her arrival meant the return of life as usual. But something was different that day.
ごめんなさい、ユイ。記憶伝達実験は終了よ。もう実験に参加することはないわ。
Salyu doubted her ears. In other words, she had been released from her one and only duty.
なぜ
被験体 N が人格を失ってしまったの。彼女がそうなってしまっては実験の継続も不可能だから。
まさか N か
She remembered hearing that term before. What she couldn't remember was if she heard it with her own ears, or if it was a copy of someone else's knowledge. What she knew for sure is that once enified, communicators did not return to normal.
6年にもわたる実験に脳が耐えられなかったのね。
6 years.
新しいコミュニケーターは被験体 Y2 という人もいるんでしょう。
彼女は記憶伝達実験には参加させないことになったわ。彼女はラボが要する最後のコミュニケーターだから N 化の危険があることはさせられない。だから実験をすることはもうできない。
いや
Salyu shouted that before she realized it. She clung to the professor and spoke with a trembling voice.
実験をして博士そうでなければ私は自身の存在の無意味さに耐えられない。記憶を詰め込まれるのが私の存在意義。私はそのための空洞でしょ。
Oh, fuck.
私からその役目を奪わないで。
What a terribly fucking sad.
ダメなのよ、ユイ。これ以上の実験継続は危険なの。あなたの脳にも悪影響が出ているのよ。自覚症状はない？あなたの自己意識は極度に肥大化しているけど、代わりに他者の気持ちを理解する機能が失われつつあるはず。
嘘。
じゃあユイ、私が今何を考えているのかわかる？
わかる。
言ってごらんなさい。
Dr. Tenkawa smiled. Her smile was a key detail for Salyu to judge. Salyu felt like she was making a serious mistake somewhere, but she stated her judgment nonetheless.
楽しいと思っている。
When Salyu gave her answer, tears suddenly welled up in the professor's eyes. The professor cried while still smiling.
博士、それはどういう意味の表情？
考えなくていいの。これ以上そんなこと考えなくていいのよ。
The professor hugged Salyu's shoulders as she spoke.
あなたはもう限界の際にいるの。私もこれからできる限りのことはするから。だから。
Her voice was gentle. So gentle that even Salyu could just barely recognize that the professor was worried about her. But none of that mattered to Salyu. She was now aware that she had been cut away from the world. She shuddered at that loneliness. A long time passed after that. With everything else, I don't know how I feel about. It was always, from the beginning, it was a really strong part of Salyu's character. Sort of her adapting to that. What's essentially, you could say, was coded as her being on the autistic spectrum, to some extent. With her inability to lack of ability to have empathy towards others, understand others. I don't know how I feel about that being a result of BC. Unless we want to believe that she was always, to an extent, this way, and the experiments only made this worse. As wild as the rest of this has been, I don't know how I feel about that particular fact taking away from her character somewhat. Sally's voice echoed through her room.
195、196、197、
She was counting push-ups.
200。
Sally finished her training and took a deep breath. Sally thought to herself as she wiped off her sweat. Exercise is good. My body, until it gets sore, it takes my mind off of unnecessary thoughts and I can really feel the results. She finally became able to use the extensive physical techniques that had been written onto her brain. That said, she couldn't practice gymnastics or track and field techniques in this room. Sally's favorites were things like simple muscle training and martial arts. Kata training methods in Japanese martial arts were particularly suitable for her needs since they allowed for the honing of one's combat skills even in the absence of a partner. She imagined enemies in front of her to fight. She had already fought countless times with these shadows. Recently she had been fighting several of these enemies in quick succession. She could really feel herself getting stronger. Of course, it's all meaningless in the end, as she was shut off from the world. Sally had no proof of her own existence aside from animalistic responses like growth and fatigue. Training, eating. Those two things had become Sally's entire life. Sally took a shower in the bathroom her room was furnished with. Nothing for her to do afterwards, just sleep. She changed into her sleepwear and crawled into bed. Soon enough it came time for lights out, and the room went dark. Professor didn't come today either. Professor had made it a habit to come up with some sort of reason to go see Sally each day. These last few days, even that had come to a halt. She was busy seeing other test subjects. The more she thought about it, the more frightened she became. She tried to stop thinking, but she still had a hard time going to sleep. Sally shut her eyes in the darkness, but for a short while the light suddenly turned on. She almost feared that morning had come before she had fallen asleep. As soon as that thought crossed Sally's mind, the professor rushed into the room.
Yui, 起きてる?
博士？
Professor rarely visited at this hour. Confused, Sally got up from her bed.
起きてたけど、何？
Yui, ここを出られると言ったらどうする?
Sally gasped at the professor's words.
どうして急にそんなことを？
ようやく許可が取れたの。上が心変わりをする前に決めてしまいましょう。
嘘。そんなことできるわけがない。
Sally was shaken up by those unexpected words. The professor spoke clearly.
そうよね。上層部の連中は無論、あなたがラボから出ることを認めなかった。
無理もない。私が外でラボの内情を語れば、この施設の運営が破綻するもの。
そこで私が出した条件は、 ユイの記憶を改ざんし、ラボの実態に関する全記憶を抹消すること。それと引き換えにあなたを自由にする。
Sally was surprised for a second. When she thought about it, her continued existence in Labo had long since lost its meaning. After losing her role as a test subject, Sally had apparently already been treated as discarded. As long as she had lost her memories of the facility, then even Labo would benefit from getting her out of there.
ユイ、正直に答えて。あなたはここを出て自由になりたい。
Sally did not understand why she had answered the way she did at the time. For this moment, not once had she ever held that hope, and yet,
なりたい。
Sally declared with distinct clarity. That was the first decision she had ever made for herself in their 13 years of life. She chose her own future.
よく言ったわ、ユイ。あなたに自由と。
Oops, sorry. The professor took Sally by the hand and out of the room.
記憶操作はもう一人の被験体が行うわ。
もう一人って被験体 Y2 が？
The professor nodded. Sally hadn't seen Subject Y2's face, but she had heard of her designation. There was a communicator called Subject Y2 in the room next to Sally's. The professor took Sally to that room and opened the door. Yuuri! Behind that door was a sweet-looking girl.
はじめまして、ユイちゃん。あなたは？私はユーリ、ことのユーリ。
あなたの記憶改ざんを行うコミュニケーターよ。
残念ながらすぐにお別れになるし、私の記憶も消えちゃうけど、でも私は忘れないよ、あなたのこと。ごめんなさい。
Sally frantically tried to decipher Yuri's feelings as she gave that answer. Sally would be set free. Yuuri would stay confined. That was unfair. Sally thought that Yuuri might be sad, but...
謝らないで。ね。私は本当に嬉しいの。私の力であなたを自由にしてあげられることが。
Why was she happy? Was she lying or telling the truth? Sally had no idea. From the bottom of her heart, Sally wished for those words to be true. Soon the professor took medicine out of her pocket.
ユイ、この薬を飲んで。
これは？
ラボがたびたび使用している強力な睡眠薬よ。これを飲んで目が覚めたらあなたは私の遠縁の親戚として外の世界で暮らすの。三宮ルイーズ・ユイという名前で日仏ハーフの戸籍も用意したわ。
三宮？
三宮は私の旧姓。ルイーズは気高き戦いという意味よ。
うん、悪くない。
Professor handed Sally the medicine. After a moment's hesitation, Sally swallowed it. It didn't take long before her head began to go hazy.
ゆいちゃん、私のベッドに横になって。
Sally plopped onto the bed as told. She heard the professor and Yuuri speaking.
13年分の記憶改ざんとなると生半可な量じゃないけど。
やってみます。
That voice faded into the distance. Sally strained her eyes in an attempt to see Yuri's face clearly one last time, but her eyelids shut against her will. Her sight and hearing sank into the darkness. Sally felt like she heard the professor's voice.
おやすみなさい、ユイ。明日からあなたの本当の人生が始まるのよ。
Sally smiled faintly at those words. Then she fell into a deep sleep. Sally felt as if she were rocking in a cradle. She heard the sound of a car engine. Eventually she heard the professor's voice as well.
ユイ、ユイ。着いたわよ。
そう。
When Sally answered, the car stopped. Ah! And Sally went flying into the back of the seat. Fucking braked like crazy. As she got out of the car, a never-before-seen sight spread out before her eyes. A gentle breeze caressed Sally's cheek. The professor stood next to her and spoke.
よく眠っていたわね。
夢を見ていた。
夢？
そう、夢。フランスの聖火にいた頃の何もない灰色の日々の、何も起こらなかったはずなのに、とても悲しい夢だった気がする。
心配しないでいいのよ、ゆい。もうあの屋敷には戻らなくてもいいの。今日からあなたはこの六名士で暮らすんだから。
Sally had heard that her parents and the professor had held a discussion. They concluded that Sally would temporarily be put under the custody of the professor and live in her hometown.
慣れない土地で不便もあるけれど、不自由することはないと思うわ。
でも、やるべきことがあるでしょ。
偉いわ、よく覚えていたわね。
当然、それよりやるべきことの内容を確認したい。
あなたのここでの役目は、私の息子天川夏彦を守ることよ。
何から？
もろもろの悪意からよ。近頃はこの町も治安が悪くなってるから、もっともずっと昔に比べればマシなのかもしれないけど。
昔はどうだったの？
かつてはこの町でも反 BC デモやコミュニケーターへの迫害があったし、その後にもコミュニケーターの住居が直接破壊活動の標的となったの。その時標的となった建物は半壊し、死者も出たわ。
そう、見た感じ平和そうな町なのに。
ここまで来るのに16年の歳月を要したのよ。でもどれだけ強固な砦を築いても完全な平穏は保証されない。適正度 S の夏彦は他のコミュニケーターより危険な目に遭う確率が高い。でも私は一緒にいてあげられない。だからゆい、あなたが夏彦を守ってあげて。
承知。
ありがとう。それじゃあ注意点が一つ。夏彦は幼少時のトラウマがきっかけで死んだ幼なじみの幻影を見続けているの。幼なじみの名前は琴野優里。
琴野優里。
The name seems familiar. For some reason, hearing that name made Sally feel nostalgic. Indeed, the professor had talked to her about this topic before.
夏彦と会話するときはこの子の名前が突然出てきたりするけど、それについては触れずにそっとしておいてあげて。
琴野優里についての情報はすでに把握してある。なるべくうまくやるつもり。
そう、期待しているわ。
The professor gently spoke. Sally did not understand what those expectations actually were. She was extremely poor at judging what was on people's minds based on facial expressions and tone of voice.
やはり不安。私は他人の心が理解できないし、世の常識もわからない。そんな私が博士の息子を正しく気遣えるかどうか。
そう言うと思ってね、プレゼントを用意したの。
With that, the professor took something out of the car trunk. It appeared to be a stuffed ferret or some other similar animal.
ぬいぐるみ？
ただのぬいぐるみじゃないわ。これはエアーリーディングマスコットシステム、通称アームズといってね。
Or
他人の感情を表情や言動から推測し、あなたに伝える機能を持っているのよ。あなたが外の世界で生きていくための大切な指針となるはずだわ。
With that explanation, the professor handed the so-called arms device to Salyu. A single thought ran through Salyu's head as she looked over it carefully. Cute. The soft texture of its fur was pleasant to touch. She hadn't had an interest in such things before, but for some reason, she really took a liking to it.
人の顔にアームズの目を向けると、その表情を自動的にスキャンするわ。それでアームズが楽しげに泣いたら、その人も楽しいと思っているの。表情の他にも 声や仕草などを分析して判断を下す優れものよ。
Arms cried when the professor said that.
楽しそうな鳴き声。ということは、博士は今喜んでる？
ええ、ユイが喜んでいるみたいだからね。
便利。
よかった。気に入ったみたいね。
The professor smiled and continued talking.
さて、近くにホテルを取ってあるの。今日はそこで私と寝泊まりしましょう。
博士の家に行くのではないの？
いきなりだと環境の変化に戸惑うと思うから、段階的に慣らしていきましょう。
Understandable. With that declaration, the professor took Sally by the hand and began walking. Two of them walked through the town, the one shot of town we have. When she saw a crowd of people larger than any she'd seen back home, Sally's body began to tremble. Kind of scary.
博士、ホテルにはまだ着かないの？
いえ、先にこのショッピングエリアで生活必需品を買おうと思ったのだけど。
Right as the professor said that, a voice echoed in Salyu's head.
離れろマシロ、ガソリンだ。
Salyu gasped with a sudden yell.
博士、今のは。
Yoko was here too. When Salyu asked her that question, the professor's face froze.
今のはまさか夏彦の。
The professor looked around in a panic.
とうとう能力が。いや、それよりどこで。
博士。
まずいわ。このことが上に知られたら。
The professor muttered to herself. She seemed so taken aback that she didn't even hear Salyu's words. And on that note, it's time to read some logs, shall we? How do I find... This is what I wanted. Holy shit, we really picked up 97 fucking tad. Alright, let's go through it. How babies learn to speak. Humans learn words in a surprisingly short amount of time in their infancy. How do they accomplish such language acquisition? It's a process that everyone goes through, yet nobody knows the specifics even to this day. Halfway through the 20th century, the mainstream theory of infant language acquisition was that infants learned by imitating how their parents spoke with other adults. Thus, there were some attempts to interpret the linguistic structures of infant babbling, but the results were fruitless. Not even adults speak consistently with perfect grammar. Furthermore, discovering the linguistic structures of language is a difficult task for adults as well. In contrast, American linguist Avram Noam Chomsky proposed that perhaps humans were innately born with the fundamental knowledge systems for language speaking. He inspired a new school of thought on linguistics, putting the focus not on the words said, but on the ability to form said words. Yeah, it feels like that's the first step to it. I'm no expert in baby speaking, but it feels like you get your mouth and tongue and throat to do the muscly things to make sounds. Then your parents make sounds back at you, and then slowly those develop, making more complex sounds, and then you're making... Eventually you say your first word. You don't know what the fuck you're saying, but it's a word, and... Can you tell I know nothing about language development? Linguistics, cognitive science, structuralism, neuroscience, various fields are taking different approaches to solve the age-old question. The truth of infant language acquisition still remains an enigma. This motherfucker. Eishi Izumi. PRC researcher, deceased. Thrived in multiple careers when designated as the head of the parapsychology research team in charge of Alice en Flamme, that is, Communicator A. With help of Tetsuyoshi Kuroda and Jin Tsubakiyama and his father, he built a favorable relationship with A, and with occasional friendly competition with the Tenkawas, his research made solid results. After the Great Rokame City arson in 2014, he pushed forward on the imminent issue of establishing a treatment facility for Enified communicators, contributing greatly to the establishment of Labo. Thus, once Labo was completed in 2016, he devoted all of his focus onto the field of researching and treating Enified test subjects. He obtained fruitful results, including the completion of AED's prototype, but unfortunately those days did not last long. Shit. In July 2017, it was established that A was 6 months pregnant. Azumi took responsibility for the Great Rokume City arson as the one in charge of A, and was deprived of his role as the research team head. In the midst of despair, he was transferred to a related enterprise where his accidental death was shortly reported. However, it remains somewhat doubtful if his death was indeed a simple accident. What the fuck's the timing of this? It was 2014. 2017, she was 6 months pregnant. And then 2017, Azumi takes responsibility for the arson 3 years later? And is ditched? Okay, this does reek of Labo trying to cover up the pregnancy scandal. They kept Alice's child in-house, transferred away the father, transferred away the guy who they had to have had evidence of being the father, and transferred him away and quietly killed him off. And Alice died in childbirth, likely. Jesus Christ, Labo. That's fucked. The whole situation's fucked. He fucking had a child with an enified test subject. Confined. Against her will. That's fucked up. Even if you want to go with a generous interpretation that she did have moments of lucidity and could have cultivated a relationship, it's still undermined by the fact that she's a fucking essentially in prison with no chance of ever getting out. Say it for whoever good it was. Fucking that kid with a test subject imprisoned and was not of sound mind. That's fucked up. AD, a lone desire. While Azumi's prototype BC receptor anesthetic had major side effects on the human body, those had been solved, and AD is still in use today. Unfortunately, however, the usage of Azumi's drug did not seem to conform to his heartfelt intentions for the girl who had a lone desire to be left alone. Oh, God. Alice? French girl known as among those in BC-related agencies as the world's first rank as aptitude communicator. Deceased. Age 21 at time of death. Well, that's at least... Thank God you're not doubling or tripling up on the fucked up of this situation. Or... what the hell old was Azumi? God. Depending on how old Azumi is, that's still really even more fucked up. She was deified as a child of God by her avaricious parents, and without her knowing why, she spent her days forced to use Senses Sympathy, causing the Andresi witch hunt. Afterwards, she halfway fled her country to Japan, relying on the Japanese government as they were the first among the developed nations to begin efforts to protect communicators. She spent her new days in the PRC under the name of Communicator A, opening her heart little by little to Eishi Azumi, the researcher in charge of her. However, by the time she came to Japan, she had already shown signs of enification. The process could not be stopped. In 2014, she became the trigger for the Great Rokume City arson. The event spurred the legislative process to complete the establishment of Labo in the government designated top secret city Rokume by 2016. Alice was transferred to Area 0 in Labo for enification treatment. Roughly a year later, she was confirmed as being 6 months pregnant. But her enification had progressed to the point where she was too weak to even maintain her sense of self. Isn't that the whole deal of being enified, is that you're no longer maintaining your sense of self? It feels like a feels like a backdated attempt to try and make this not fucked up, but it is fucked up. It's a fucked up thing that happened here. She left this world just as her daughter entered it. According to what little records remain, she lived her days in France as a gentle girl who loved flowers. Postpartum death. After giving birth, it takes some time, about 6 to 8 weeks, for a woman's body to return to the state as it was prior to pregnancy. This time is called the postpartum period, and the mother herself may be referred to as a postpartum woman. The risks of pregnancy for a mother do not end after the safe delivery of the child. Deflation of the enlarged uterus, discharge of the secretion known as lochia, weight loss, fevers. The mother's body goes through many steps in its long recovery process. A process perhaps too harsh for Alison Flam's body to handle, after she had already been exhausted in both mind and body prior to delivery. We're just gonna move on from that. That's just sad and fucked up, and I hate everything about that. Salyu is precious and deserves to be protected, but the way she came into this world and what happened to her after coming into this world is entirely fucked up. Aptitude rank, ability level. Natsuhiko Tenkawa, rank S, ability 6. Rank C, ability 0 in childhood. Yuri Kotono, rank S, ability 6. Rank C, ability 0 in childhood. Mashiro Toba, rank B, ability level 5. Unreported as level 3. Level 5 is empathy, and she had not actually reported that she developed empathy. Even though she worked her ass off and developed empathy in order to better support Natsuhiko and his delusions. Salyu, rank F, ability 0. Watase Kasasagi, rank F, ability 0. Kazumi Tachibana, rank S, ability 6. Rank D, ability 0, before the label incident. Essentially, it seems like anything above F will give you a BC boost when exposed to extreme amounts of WX particles. Or maybe it was just that... Maybe it was just that... I was gonna say maybe it was just that young Salyu was only exposed to like baseline levels of WX particles. But no, she's been here. And she hasn't shown any further BC development. So I think it's safe to say that only anything above rank F, you have a chance of getting a BC boost by being in range of the WX particle generator. Jun Moribe, rank D, ability 0. Okay, she got no effect from it. Anis Bakayama, rank F0. Keiju Kida, F0. Alison Flam, S6. Nagisa Tachibana, S6. General classification of ability levels is approximately as follows. 0, no telepathy. 1, point blank or direct contact telepathy. 2, short range telepathy. 3, long range telepathy. 4, long range telepathy and point blank or direct contact empathy. 5, very long range telepathy and short range empathy. 6, greater than 5 and senses sympathy. Rank F aptitude, oh god, there's a lot here. Rank F aptitude means that any display of ability is impossible for such an individual, and no amount of practice will change them from an ordinary person. Fuck. The absolute BC, no BC boundary between communicators and other ordinary people certainly exists. The boundary between rank S and those rank A or lower is almost as absolute. According to all previous surveys, only rank S aptitude communicators can use senses sympathy. Telepathy and empathy also become overwhelmingly easier the higher a communicator's aptitude. Due to these significant differences, some scholars even advocate that rank S aptitude individuals are the true communicators, while rank A aptitude and lower individuals are only incomplete manifestation. You could say that rank S and senses sympathy are the platonic ideal of communicators. Ah, god, that picture. High-level communicators at risk of identification, as well as their relatives and other concerned individuals, are either confined... As well as their relatives or other concerned individuals, are either confined by label for long periods of time or are tagged by them as observation targets. 7 such test subjects and observational targets have been confirmed. Lebo's attitude towards such individuals can be seen by the almost prisoner-like designations given to them. A. Alison Flum. N. Nagisa Tachibana. Y. Louise Yui Sannomiya, later Special Observation Target U. Y2. Yuri Kotono. And A2. Sodium. Natsuhiko Tenkawa. U. Louise Yui Sannomiya. Observation Target Ka. Kazumi Tachibana. Observation Target Ma. Mashutoba. Wow, they're both under observation. Shit. Evacuation mode in case N. We've had this one for a while, I just didn't check tips in a while. Emergency commands in Labo declared in cases of unforeseen circumstances. Evacuation mode is declared when the prompt evacuation becomes necessary due to the outbreak of fires or other disasters. Evacuation mode unlocks the doors to all rooms as well as the security gates that usually automatically relock after a certain period of time. However, the retina authentication for the elevator from Area N to Area 0 remains locked. Case N is declared when Subject N is improperly taken outside of Area N or Area 5. Security gates lock and the bulkheads to the surface shut, preventing Subject N's escape. Researchers and staff members promptly administer AD and are generally instructed to remain on standby until outside help arrives. Wait. Okay, the first case N of the day occurred when Watase, Dojima, and Hiyama brought Subject N out of Area 0. What was the second one? Because the second one happened during one of the normal endings. What caused that Subject N? Was it Yuuri? 9 years ago, during the Subject N escape incident, a fire-triggered evacuation mode and a case N were declared one after another, causing the security gates to temporarily open only for a short period of time before relocking. Furthermore, the bulkheads shut, preventing escape to the surface. But since at the time there was a way to open the bulkheads from the outside, Miyoko managed to narrowly escape the flames and bring Natsuhiko and Yuuri to safety. That event was fortunate in itself, but one person saw the security feature Miyoko used to be dangerous. This person was Ryoka Kashiwagi, their then senior fellow. Kashiwagi hypothesized that the ability to open the bulkheads from the outside meant that had the case N happened during not a simple evacuation mode but a meltdown instead. That is, had a malfunction caused the WX amplifier to go haywire, then Subject N could have utilized the amplified WX particles to invoke Senses Sympathy on someone outside them, to manipulate them to open the bulkheads and allow her to escape. Fearing this worst-case scenario, Kashiwagi amended the security procedure so that in the event of a simultaneous meltdown and case N, nobody on the inside, or obviously on the outside for that matter, could open the bulkheads until Brain Cell confirmed the neutralization of the meltdown, and open up the bulkheads automatically. Thus, Subject N's escape would be prevented, though at the potential sacrifice of the researchers and staff members who didn't escape in time. Was the motivation for enacting such a drastic security measure the cowardly fear of exposing the truth behind Labo? Was it a modest sense of justice to protect the general public from potential danger? Nobody will ever know. Nobody will ever know which. There's probably a bit of both. The fact that there's even any of the first is disgusting. Then, on a lighter note, Gaspard de la Nuit. For his either... Oh, this is a long one. For his either the 19th century poem anthology by French poet Aloysius Bertrand, with a suite of piano pieces composed by Maurice Ravel based on them. In the anthology, Bertrand opens with the story of his encounter with a character revealed to be Gaspard de la Nuit, Gaspard of the Night. He hands him a book containing the results of his journey to find the meaning of art. The rest of the anthology is formatted as Bertrand having published that book as a collection of fantasy prose poetry. Ravel composed his suite based on the anthology in 1908. The soft pieces required nimble fingering and positions that crossed the hands, making it a difficult suite to play, perhaps even the most difficult of all of Ravel's compositions. Incidentally, the name Gaspard is given to one of the 3 wise men who appear in the New Testament to witness the birth of Jesus Christ. Maurice Ravel. Interested. I'm gonna look that up on my own now. I'm just gonna do that right here. Well. Queen of the Natsuhiko. Prince Tomino is attacked by a serpent. He is saved by 3 ladies, attendants to the Queen of the Night. When the 3 ladies show him a portrait of the Queen's daughter, Pamina, Tomino finds her enchantingly beautiful and embarks with the bird catcher Papageno to Sarastro's temple where the Pamina is held captive. Tomino hears that Sarastro is an evil sorcerer, but is in fact a high priest with noble intentions to protect Pamina, so that she does not become a sacrifice for the Queen of the Night's ambitions of world conquest. Sarastro declares that in order for Tomino and Pamina's mutual love to be filled, Tomino must overcome the trials of wisdom. When the Queen of the Night learns of this, hell's vengeance boils in her heart. The Queen of the Night's aria refers to the second aria sung by the Queen of the Night in Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's 1791 opera, Die Zauberflöte. Die Zauberflöte, the Magic Flute, formerly entitled Der Hoel rasch kocht in meinen Herzen. Hell's vengeance boils in my heart. In the first act, Queen of the Night is depicted as a tragic mother whose daughter is held captive by an evil sorcerer. But in the second act, her character takes an about face, as she's depicted as a vengeful evil queen. She remains the same being throughout the Magic Flute, but she never returns to goodness before her life ends. Similarly, the girl who became the malicious subject N never returned to being the Nagisa Tachibana who loved her older sister. Whose fault is that? I'm looking at you, Labo! Louise is the French girl's name, the feminine form of the masculine Louis. Since it has many kings by the name of Louis, the House of Bourbon is sometimes called the Louis dynasty, and likewise Louis and Louise often used as noble names. The origin of the name is often seen to stem from the 8th to 11th century Old High German name Ludwig. Pretty sure it's just Ludwig. The HL makes me want to pronounce it Ludwig, which is in turn thought to have come from the Norse god of war Odin, and means renowned warrior. Thus the derivative name Louis and Louise means something similar to noble warrior as well. Due to Salyu's unique upbringing, she was confined in labor before she was even born. Perhaps Miyoko wished that even an isolated girl like Sally could one day live her life with her chin up in pride. I like to think she found that by Natsuhiko and Mashiro's side. Wow. Well, this has been a whopper episode. God damn. There's a lot of shit that happened here. There's some shit that I saw coming. There's some shit that we could fits everything we knew. There's some shit that's extremely fucked up of Labo. I got next to no sympathy for Labo now. Whatever sympathy I might have had for Labo's point is gone. It's just gone. Even if we believe that Azumi legitimately had good intentions and was legitimately in love with her, still fucked up. Still fucked up. Still fucked up. Still fucked up.